Her shift began before sunrise, long before the roar of jets or the chatter of cadets filled the airbase. The corridors were quiet at that hour, sterile white lights humming above, the scent of disinfectant still clinging from the overnight mopping. Crew. She wheeled her cart across the polished floors, its rubber wheels squeaking faintly against the tiles. Most people never noticed her, even when she passed them directly in the hallway. She was a cleaner, necessary, but invisible. And, on mornings like this, she preferred it that way. Her assignment was the retired aircraft wing, a place tucked away from the noise and bustle of the main hangars. The planes there had long been decommissioned, their sleek bodies frozen in time. They were preserved as training tools and historical displays, meant to inspire cadets with the power and precision of American aviation. Few officers visited that section unless they were giving tours, which made it the perfect place for her to work quietly. She liked it there. The air always felt different in the old wing, heavy, almost reverent. Every aircraft seemed to carry its own silence, as though the ghosts of missions past still lingered inside the cockpits. She would often pause in her cleaning, running her hand across the cool metal fuselage of a jet, wondering where it had flown, who had piloted it, and what stories had unfolded miles above the earth. Her favorite, though she'd never admit it aloud, was the F-4 Phantom sitting in the far corner of the hangar. It was no longer battle-ready, its edges softened by time, paint dulled by years. But something about its design fascinated her. It looked fierce, even when still. Whenever she stepped into the cockpit, sliding carefully into the cramped space, she felt the weight of history pressing down around her. She liked to imagine what it must have been like for the pilot, the roar of the engine, the shaking of the controls, the dizzying sky. But she never let her imagination distract her for long. She had a job to do. The commander made it clear these planes were to be kept spotless, not for flying, but for appearance. Dust had no place in a room meant to remind young cadets of the nation's strength, so she worked with discipline. Every lever polished, every instrument panel wiped clean, every surface gleaming as if ready for an inspection. She wasn't uneducated. In fact, she had studied aviation mechanics in community college years ago. But life had a way of rerouting plans. Bills piled up, her mother fell ill, and the tuition money had to be spent on medication instead of textbooks. By the time she stabilized her life again, she couldn't afford to return. Cleaning was steady work, and the airbase offered health benefits, so she took the job and kept her head down. Still, whenever she stepped into a cockpit, her old fascination with aircraft stirred quietly inside her. She noticed details others might ignore, the way the dials were arranged, the slight wear on switches, the careful design choices made decades ago. She often thought she appreciated the planes more than the cadets who breezed through, barely glancing before moving on to the next lesson. That morning, as the rising sun cast faint gold through the high windows of the hangar, she slipped on her gloves and began her routine. She climbed the ladder into the Phantom, her knees brushing against the cold frame of the cockpit. The seat was worn, creases deep from years of use. She took her rag, dampened it with cleaning solution, and began wiping the edges of the canopy. Glass. Her movements were practiced, almost meditative. Wipe, polish, inspect, wipe again. She took pride in making even the smallest surfaces gleam. The commander might never thank her, but she knew the aircraft deserved dignity. Machines that once roared across the sky shouldn't be left to gather dust like forgotten relics. As she worked, her thoughts drifted to the pilots who once sat where she sat. She wondered about their nerves before takeoff, the pressure of their missions, the friendships and rivalries that must have formed in squadrons. Some of them were likely retired now, living quietly in suburbs. Others, well, not everyone who Flew came home. The airbase had a memorial wall, names etched in stone, and she sometimes paused there before clocking in. The sight of those names reminded her that her quiet cleaning was part of a bigger story, one written in sweat, risk, and sacrifice. She brushed dust from beneath the instrument panel, her fingers catching on an uneven edge. She pulled the rag free and continued, not thinking much of it. Old aircraft often had quirks like that. She leaned closer, squinting at the seat's leather, noticing the deep cracks along the stitching. She would have to scrub carefully. Leather could be temperamental, especially if it was older than she was. Outside the cockpit, the hangar echoed with distant sounds. A door closing, boots tapping against the floor, muffled voices in another section. She liked that. The background noise reminded her that life at the base never truly stopped. There was always someone training, someone fixing, someone preparing. Yet here, in the Phantom's cockpit, she felt shielded, cocooned in a silence broken only by her own steady breathing. As the minutes passed, she worked her way down, scrubbing the floorboard, reaching beneath the seat where dust often collected. She wasn't expecting to find anything unusual, only dirt, crumbs, maybe the odd forgotten screw. But her rag snagged again, harder this time. She frowned, tugging gently, and felt resistance. Something rough scratched against her glove. She paused, tilting her head, eyes narrowing. Beneath the cracked leather, she noticed something strange. A small section of fabric, darker than the seat itself, stitched in place awkwardly. It wasn't part of the original upholstery. She had cleaned enough cockpits to know when something didn't belong. At first, she thought it might just be a repair patch, maybe done hastily years ago. But the stitching was uneven, almost crude, unlike the precision of military maintenance. Her curiosity flickered. She ran her fingers over it, feeling the texture, coarse, rougher than standard fabric. She hesitated. Technically, she wasn't supposed to meddle with aircraft components. Her job was cleaning, not inspecting. Still, the patch tugged at her attention in a way she couldn't ignore. It was like spotting a misplaced word in a carefully written book, something so out of place that it demanded explanation. Her mind whispered a warning. Leave it alone. Get back to polishing. But her hands moved anyway, tracing the edge of the fabric, searching for where it ended. Beneath her gloves, she felt the faint outline of something more, as though the patch was hiding not just a repair, but a secret. The hangar suddenly felt colder. She leaned back, breathing slowly, her eyes fixed on that hidden patch. She didn't yet understand what she had found, or why her chest now tightened with unease. She only knew one thing for certain. This was no ordinary cleaning shift. Somewhere in the stillness of the Phantom, history was waiting to be uncovered. Her rag snagged harder this time, refusing to slide free from under the pilot's worn leather seat. She tugged once, then again, frowning at the stubborn resistance. Normally, cleaning mishaps meant catching on a loose spring, a rusted bolt, or some other harmless imperfection in an old cockpit. But this felt different. The fabric beneath her fingers wasn't metal, leather, or wire. It was something else, something rough. She shifted, wedging herself deeper into the cramped space, her knees pressed against cold panels, her back aching from the awkward angle. With her left hand she steadied herself, and with her right she pulled the rag free. A faint tearing sound followed, not loud but sharp enough to echo in the silence of the hangar. She froze. The cloth came loose, but clinging to it was a small strand of dark thread, frayed and brittle. She looked closer. Beneath the cracked leather seat was a patch. Not the kind a factory stitched in, not the kind she had seen during countless cleaning shifts. This one looked hand-sewn, stitched into place with uneven lines, as if done quickly and in secret. Her breath caught. At first, she thought it might just be a field repair. Soldiers were resourceful. They patched uniforms, gear, even cockpit. Seats with whatever material they had on hand. But this wasn't a neat square of replacement fabric. It had shape, intent. Its edges weren't meant to blend in. They seemed meant to conceal. Leaning closer, she brushed her gloved hand across it. The fabric was coarse, older than the seat itself, and slightly discolored. She tilted her head, squinting in the dim light that slanted through the canopy. There was something on it, a faded design. She held her breath as the faint outline of embroidery came into focus. Sharp lines, jagged curves, a shape both familiar and foreign. At first glance, it almost resembled an eagle, wings spread wide, but not the proud, polished eagle of American insignias. This one looked darker, more aggressive, stitched in heavy thread that had dulled with age. Her pulse quickened. She had seen dozens of patches before. Cadets wore them, pilots wore them, even mechanics stitched them onto jackets for pride. They represented squadrons, missions, victories. But this didn't match anything she knew. It wasn't Air Force blue. It wasn't a NATO symbol. It wasn't even the star and bar roundel she'd grown used to spotting on every aircraft. It was something else. She sat back slightly, the rag still in her hand, her eyes locked on the hidden patch. A small part of her wanted to laugh. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a forgotten piece of fabric shoved there decades ago, stitched by a bored mechanic who needed to fix a tear. But the more she stared, the more certain she became that this was deliberate. This was meant to be hidden. And she had just uncovered it. The hanger felt heavier now, the silence pressing in. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone watching her. But the space remained empty, still, bathed in muted light. The other planes loomed like sleeping giants, shadows stretching long across the floor. She was alone. Her curiosity wrestled with caution. She wasn't supposed to tamper with aircraft. Her job was cleaning, nothing more. Yet something in her gut urged her to pull further, to see what lay beneath. The stitching was weak, frayed in spots. A careful tug would probably reveal the whole thing. Her fingers hovered over the patch, trembling slightly. She thought of her supervisor. If she reported this, would they even believe her? Or worse, would they accuse her of damaging the aircraft? Cleaners were replaceable. The Air Force made that clear. One wrong move, and she could lose her job. And yet, what if this was important? What if it wasn't just fabric, but a clue, a relic, a fragment of history hidden in plain sight? The emblem felt purposeful, symbolic, the kind of thing people went to great lengths to preserve, or to bury. She pulled gently at the edge. The leather peeled back with a faint creak, exposing more of the patch. Her breath quickened as the full emblem emerged. The eagle shape was clearer now, wings stretching, talons curved. But instead of clutching arrows or an olive branch, as the American eagle did, this one held a dagger. Her heart skipped. A dagger. The thread glistened faintly in the sunlight, though most of it had faded to dull gray. She traced it with her finger, her gloves brushing against the old embroidery. The symbol radiated menace, nothing like the official, polished insignias proudly displayed on flight suits. This one whispered secrecy, violence, power. She sat frozen, staring, her mind racing with possibilities. Was this an enemy's emblem? A relic stitched into the seat as some kind of warning or trophy? Or was it American, a design never meant for public eyes? She thought of the Cold War, of shadowy stories whispered about secret missions and black squadrons. Could it be connected? Her thoughts spiraled. She imagined the pilot who once sat here, carrying that patch beneath him on every mission. Did he stitch it himself? Did his squadron wear it? Were they proud of it or cursed by it? Questions bubbled up faster than she could answer them. Her breathing grew shallow. She forced herself to glance away, grounding herself. It was just a piece of fabric, that's all. Just a forgotten patch. She should clean it, note it, and move on. But her instincts screamed otherwise. The atmosphere in the hangar shifted. The silence no longer felt comforting but oppressive, charged with a weight she couldn't explain. Even the air seemed colder, as if the discovery itself had stirred. Something dormant. She stuffed the rag back into her cart, staring at the patch one last time. Maybe she'd come back to it later. Maybe she'd mention it quietly to her supervisor, frame it as a casual observation. But deep down, she knew she wouldn't. Something told her this was the kind of discovery that people didn't share lightly. Unseen by her, the door at the far end of the hangar creaked open. Heavy footsteps echoed against the concrete floor, slow and deliberate. She was still crouched in the cockpit, her eyes fixed on the mysterious emblem, when the sound of boots drew closer. She didn't hear him at first. She was too focused, too entranced by the hidden symbols stitched beneath the seat, too unaware that her discovery had already drawn attention, and that the man approaching carried knowledge of its meaning, knowledge heavy enough to make him pale. Her fingers trembled as she traced the edges of the strange emblem. Even beneath her gloves, she could feel the roughness of the hand-stitched thread. It wasn't machine work. It was too uneven, too human. Whoever had sewn it there had done so deliberately, in secret, and with a kind of urgency that made her chest tighten. She leaned closer, her breath fogging faintly against the canopy glass as she studied the design. At first, it still resembled an eagle, wings spread wide, body squared and fierce. But this wasn't the noble eagle she'd grown up seeing on coins, flags, and military uniforms. No stars, no olive branch, no arrows clutched proudly in its talons. This eagle carried something else, a dagger. The dagger was stitched in darker thread, almost black, though time had dulled it to gray. Its blade cut diagonally across the emblem, a slash of menace that set the symbol apart from any she'd ever encountered. The eagle's eyes, or where they would be, were exaggerated, sharp and severe, not symbols of freedom, but of predation. Her heart thudded. The longer she stared, the heavier it seemed. She had no formal training in military history, beyond what she picked up in school and her short-lived college courses. But she'd seen her share of patches, insignias, and crests. This one didn't match anything from her textbooks. It didn't even look like an enemy emblem she'd recognize from history. This wasn't German, wasn't Russian, wasn't Vietnamese. It was something else entirely, something secret. A part of her brain tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a forgotten design from a training squadron, one that never became official. Maybe it was just some mechanic's inside joke, a stitched symbol for their unit that nobody else would ever know. But as she ran her eyes over the dagger, again her gut told her otherwise. This wasn't a joke. This was a message. She sat back slightly, exhaling slowly, her rag hanging useless in her hand. The hangar remained silent, but the silence no longer comforted her. It pressed in heavy, amplifying the thrum of her pulse in her ears. She glanced toward the windows high above, where streaks of morning sunlight spilled across the floor, and, for the first time since she began her shift, she wished someone else were here. Her mind spun with questions. Why here, in this cockpit? Why stitched into the seat itself, where only someone cleaning or dismantling would ever find it? Why not displayed proudly on a jacket or a shoulder? The placement suggested secrecy, an attempt to hide the emblem while keeping it close, like a talisman. Was the pilot who flew this phantom part of something hidden, something unspoken? She swallowed hard. She had heard whispers, of course. Anyone working long enough at a base did. Stories traded in hushed tones during late-night shifts, half-believed rumors about squadrons that flew missions nobody admitted existed. Black Ops, some called them. Ghost flights, said others. Planes with no official records, pilots who never logged hours, missions scrubbed from history before the ink dried. Most dismissed such talk as fantasy, the kind of thing bored airmen conjured to pass the time. But staring at that dagger-wielding eagle, she wondered if the rumors had roots in truth. What if those stories weren't myths, but fragments, faint, echoes of something real? Her hand hovered over the patch again, itching to peel it free completely. She wanted to hold it, to study it under better light, to prove to herself she wasn't imagining the weight it seemed to carry. But she hesitated. Removing it felt like crossing a line she couldn't return from. It was one thing to stumble upon a secret. It was another to take it into your hands. She clenched her jaw, torn between impulse and fear. The practical side of her argued, walk away. It's just fabric. Finish your cleaning, clock out, and forget it ever existed. The Air Force wasn't kind to meddlers, especially not civilian contractors. If anyone accused her of tampering with equipment, she'd be out of work in a heartbeat. But the deeper, hungrier part of her, the part that once dreamed of being more than a cleaner, the part that studied aviation and longed for meaning, whispered, don't turn away. Secrets like this don't fall into just anyone's lap. Maybe you found it for a reason. Her hand moved again, almost against her will. She pinched the edge of the leather, pulling gently. The old stitching gave way with a faint snap, the sound brittle, fragile, yet deafening to her ears. She peeled it back further, exposing more of the emblem. Now she could see the border, a rough circle surrounding the eagle and dagger as if enclosing it in shadow. The circle was uneven, the thread frayed, but its intent was clear. This wasn't random. This was a crest, a mark of identity, a claim of belonging to something she couldn't name. Her throat tightened. She had to look away. She forced herself to lean back, drawing in a long breath. Her chest ached from holding air too long, her nerves buzzing like live wires. She blinked rapidly, grounding herself by staring at the familiar cockpit controls. The throttle, the yoke, the array of switches she had cleaned 100 times. They looked the same as always, ordinary and dull. But now, with that hidden emblem lurking beneath the seat, even the familiar seemed different, charged, dangerous. Her eyes drifted back against her will. The dagger glistened faintly. Where? The sunlight struck it, as if mocking her attempt to ignore it. She clenched her fists. Why here? Why this plane? Why had no one else discovered it before her? Surely maintenance crews had inspected these aircraft dozens of times over the years. Surely someone would have noticed. Unless they already knew. The thought chilled her. Maybe others had found it before her. Maybe they had seen, understood, and chosen silence. Maybe the emblem wasn't forgotten, but deliberately left. Untouched, a secret preserved because exposing it meant consequences none of them wanted. She shivered, though the air in the cockpit hadn't changed. She felt like a trespasser now, like she'd stepped into a room she wasn't supposed to enter. The emblem didn't belong to her. It belonged to another world, one of classified. Files, shadowed missions, and men who spoke in codes instead of truths. And she was sitting in the middle of it, rag in hand, as if polishing dust could erase what she'd just seen. She bit her lip, torn between covering it back up or pulling it free. Every instinct in her screamed for an answer, but every ounce of caution begged her to stop. Her hands shook. The hanger groaned faintly, a sound carried by shifting steel and wind pressing against its vast walls. It startled her, pulling her out of her trance. For the first time, she realized how long she had been crouched there, staring. Time had stretched, minutes slipping by unnoticed. She straightened slowly, heart racing, eyes darting toward the far end of the hangar. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt watched. Her gaze flicked back to the patch. The eagle's dagger seemed to gleam sharper now, as though it knew she had seen too much. And in that moment, deep in the pit of her stomach, she understood. This was no ordinary emblem. It wasn't meant for cadets, wasn't meant for history books, wasn't meant for her eyes. It was a secret, and secrets had keepers. The groan of the hangar door rolled through the cavernous space like distant thunder. She froze, crouched in the cockpit, heart skipping a beat. The sound of boots followed, steady, deliberate, echoing with authority against the concrete floor. Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. They were coming with purpose. Her pulse quickened. Few people ever entered this wing during cleaning hours. Supervisors occasionally passed by, but the commanders? Never. This was her quiet corner, her sanctuary of solitude. The sound of those boots shattered it. She glanced at the emblem again, instinctively tugging at the leather to cover it back up. The stitching was too old, too frayed. It wouldn't hold. The patch peeked through like a secret refusing to stay buried. She wiped at it uselessly, as if a rag could erase what her eyes had already seen. The footsteps drew closer. A shadow stretched long across the hangar floor. Then, at the base of the Phantom's ladder, a figure appeared. Broad shoulders, uniform pressed sharp, rows of ribbons pinned neatly on the chest. The base commander. She had seen him before at ceremonies, his presence commanding even in silence. Men saluted him with precision, and cadets straightened at his glance. He carried the air of someone who had lived through battles most people only read about. His hair, once dark, had silvered at the temples, but his eyes were steel, sharp and unyielding. She never expected to see him here. He climbed the ladder with the ease of a man who had done it thousands of times, his boots clanging softly against the rungs. She scrambled to her feet inside the cockpit, clutching her rag like a shield. Her throat tightened. Civilians didn't often share spaces this small with commanders. "Morning, ma'am," he said, his voice low, steady, carrying the weight of discipline. She nodded quickly, murmuring something that barely passed for a greeting. Her eyes flicked nervously to the patch, praying he wouldn't notice. But commanders noticed everything. His gaze swept the cockpit, taking in its polished panels, its cleaned surfaces, before landing squarely on her trembling hands. Then, as if magnetized, his eyes locked on the patch. The change was immediate. His expression shifted, not with anger, not with irritation, but with something far heavier. Color drained from his face, leaving his skin pale beneath the hangar's cold light. His jaw clenched, his lips pressed into a thin line, and for the first time since she'd seen him, he looked human, vulnerable. "What's that?" he asked. His tone was quiet, but the quiet made it worse. It wasn't the bark of authority she expected. It was softer, strained, like a man asking a question he already feared the answer to. She stammered, her words tumbling awkwardly. I was cleaning, sir. The cloth got caught under the seat, and I found this. I didn't mean to." He cut her off with a raised hand. His eyes never left the emblem. He reached forward, slowly, carefully, as though touching something dangerous. His gloved fingers brushed the edge of the patch, tracing the uneven stitching. His breath deepened, nostrils flaring slightly, and his shoulders stiffened as if bracing against a memory that had surged uninvited. For a long moment, silence hung between them. Only the distant hum of the hangar lights filled the air. She shifted nervously, waiting for him to say something, anything. Finally, he spoke. His voice was lower now, almost a whisper. Where exactly did you find this? She pointed quickly, her hand shaking. Under the seat, sir. I thought it was just a repair. But then I saw the stitching, and he cut her off again, this time with a sharp exhale. He pinched the bridge of his nose, closing his eyes for a moment, as though steadying himself. When he opened them again, they were colder, harder, carrying a weight she couldn't decipher. You shouldn't have seen this, he muttered. Not to her, but to himself. Her stomach twisted. Sir? His gaze snapped back to her, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw fear flicker in his steel-gray eyes. Not fear of her, but fear of the patch, fear of what it represented. He reached down, tugging firmly at the frayed stitching until the patch came loose in his hand. He held it up, turning it slowly, his fingers tight around the worn fabric. The dagger gleamed faintly in the light, its menace undimmed by age. He stared at it for so long she wondered if he'd forgotten she was even there. His jaw worked, muscles tightening and relaxing, as if he were wrestling with words he couldn't release. Finally, he spoke again. Do you know what this is? She shook her head quickly. No, sir. I've never seen anything like it. He studied her for a beat, his eyes narrowing, as though searching for any sign of deceit. When he seemed satisfied she was telling the truth, he sighed heavily. The sound carried exhaustion, not just of the body but of years, decades, pressing down all at once. He slipped the patch into his pocket with a motion so quick she almost missed it. Then he looked back at her, his voice firm but quieter than before. You didn't see this. Do you understand? She blinked. Sir, do you understand? He repeated, sharper now, the edge of command cutting through his restraint. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. Yes, sir. For the first time, he broke eye contact, his gaze drifting toward the canopy glass. His reflection stared back at him, older, heavier, carrying secrets etched into lines across his face. He muttered something under his breath, words too soft for her to catch, but the bitterness in his tone was unmistakable. She dared not move. The cockpit suddenly felt smaller, suffocating under the weight of his presence. She wanted to leave, to escape, but her legs felt rooted in place. Finally, he turned back to her. You'll continue your work as usual. No one needs to know about this. Not your supervisor, not your colleagues. No one. Her lips parted to respond, but he raised a finger, silencing her. No one, he repeated. His tone left no room for argument. She nodded slowly, her hands tightening around her rag. Understood, sir. He studied her again, searching her face for any sign of rebellion, any spark of curiosity that might defy his order. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because he finally exhaled, shoulders slumping slightly. But the paleness in his face remained. He descended the ladder without another word, his boots heavy against the rungs. She watched him walk away, his back rigid, his steps slower than when he entered. He didn't look back. The hangar fell silent. Again, but it wasn't the same silence she knew before. It was heavier now, charged with unspoken truth. She sat in the cockpit, the imprint of the patch still burned into her mind, and realized nothing about this routine duty was ordinary anymore. The commander stood near the base of the Phantom now, one hand resting on the ladder as if steadying himself. His breathing was deliberate, slower than before, as though forcing calm into a body that wanted to shake. The patch, now tucked deep in his pocket, seemed to weigh on him more heavily than his medals. She remained in the cockpit, frozen. Her instincts screamed at her to stay silent, but her mind burned with questions. The image of the eagle clutching the dagger lingered in her vision, sharper than any insignia she'd ever seen. What could make a man like him, hardened, respected, a veteran of decades, turn pale? Finally, he spoke. His voice had lost its crispness. It was lower, rougher, carrying the grit of someone speaking against their own better judgment. You weren't supposed to see that? She swallowed hard, her hands gripping the edge of the seat. I didn't mean, I know you didn't, he interrupted, not unkindly but firmly. His gaze drifted upward, toward the canopy and the rafters of the hangar, as though searching for words among the steel beams. Still, now that you have, it doesn't disappear. Once you've seen it, it's there. Silence hung between them again. She dared not speak, afraid even the wrong word could unravel what little control he held over himself. After a long pause, he drew in a sharp breath. That emblem doesn't exist on any roster. Not officially. You won't find it in archives, in museums, in training manuals. It isn't there because it was never meant to be. Her brows furrowed. What do you mean? He looked at her then, his steel-gray eyes locking onto hers with a gravity that rooted her in place. It belonged to a squadron, one that operated in the shadows during the Cold War. They weren't sanctioned in the way others were. Not fully. They carried no public record, no official patch, no recognition. But they existed. Her breath caught. A secret squadron? He hesitated before answering, as if the very words might conjure ghosts. Secret isn't the right word. Forgotten is closer. Buried. He shifted, stepping closer to the ladder. His voice dropped further, softer now, but the weight behind it pressed harder. You've heard the stories, I'm sure. Pilots flying missions into airspace we weren't supposed to touch. Jets disappearing over oceans without explanation. Accidents reported in the papers, but with details that never quite made sense. Those weren't accidents. Not always. Those were them. She stared at him, wide-eyed. She had heard rumors, whispered tales of missions that never happened, of pilots who never returned, their names never etched into memorial walls. But hearing it from him gave those whispers form. The emblem, he continued, his hand tightening around the ladders. Rail was theirs. They carried it not on uniforms, not where anyone could see, but hidden. On patches stitched into cockpits, on pieces of gear kept private, markers only they recognized. It was their bond, their truth. Her chest tightened. Why hide it? He exhaled slowly, a sound heavy with memory. Because they weren't supposed to exist. If they were captured, if their aircraft went down, there could be no ties to us. No insignia, no unit numbers, no acknowledgement. They were ghosts, flying in the gray spaces between politics and war. She shivered, her imagination conjuring images of jets roaring through hostile skies, pilots gripping controls in silence. Knowing their mission could never be recorded, their sacrifice never honored. The commander's eyes darkened as he continued. The eagle with the dagger, that was their symbol. Not one approved by Washington, not one painted on the sides. Of planes, it was theirs alone. A reminder of what they were, hunters with no mercy, shadows with teeth. Her stomach turned. And the dagger? He paused, his lips pressing thin. The dagger meant they were willing to strike without warning, without recognition. 2. End what needed to be ended, no matter the cost. Some called them necessary. Others, he trailed off, his gaze distant. Others called them dangerous. She gripped the seat tighter, her knuckles whitening beneath her gloves. What happened to them? His silence stretched long. His jaw clenched, muscles twitching beneath the skin, before he finally spoke. Most didn't come back. The words hit harder than she expected. He continued, his tone bitter. Their missions were the kind nobody wanted on paper. Penetrations into enemy airspace, strikes that never made the news, recoveries of intelligence that wasn't supposed to exist. And when things went wrong, there was no rescue, no acknowledgement. Their families were told lies. Plane lost in training. accident over water, mechanical failure. His lips curled faintly, almost in disgust. The truth stayed buried with the wreckage. Her throat ached as she forced out a whisper. Why tell me this? His eyes softened for the first time, though the tension in his face remained. Because you've seen enough to start asking questions. And sometimes questions are more dangerous than answers. Better you hear fragments from me than dig in places you shouldn't. Her breath trembled. She wanted to ask more. Everything. Names, dates, missions. Who stitched this patch into the phantom seat, and why it had remained hidden all these years. But she saw the way his shoulders hunched, the weight pressing on him. This wasn't just history to him. It was memory. It was pain. He glanced toward the far end of the hangar, where the other decommissioned aircraft sat in silent rows. His eyes lingered there, distant, as though he saw not metal shells, but ghosts strapped into cockpits, their faces blurred by time. I flew with them once, he said finally, his voice almost breaking. Her eyes widened. He nodded faintly. Not as one of them. I wasn't chosen, but I was near enough to know what they carried, to see the way they looked at each other before takeoff, to hear the silence in the mess hall when one of them didn't come back. They were different. Men with the knowledge that their lives were already erased, even as they lived them. A confession hung in the air like smoke. She felt goosebumps ripple across her skin. And now, he added quietly, almost to himself, pieces of them still linger, in patches like that, in whispers, in the shadows of bases like this one, too stubborn to vanish completely, too dangerous to acknowledge. She sat frozen, her world spinning. Cleaning the cockpit had been routine, mindless. Now it felt as if she had opened a vault into history that was never meant to be opened. The commander met her gaze once more. His eyes were weary, haunted, but hard. Do you understand now why you must never mention this? She nodded slowly, though her mind screamed with unanswered questions. She understood enough that the patch wasn't just fabric. It was a wound, stitched into leather, waiting for someone like her to peel it open. And now she carried its weight too. The commander's eyes lingered on the phantom, long after he had spoken. The hangar was vast and silent, but the silence no longer comforted her. Every metallic beam above seemed to hum with a hidden energy, and the old jets around them felt alive, almost aware of what had just transpired. She stayed in the cockpit, fingers gripping the edges of the seat, heart hammering. The emblem, now safely tucked into his pocket, seemed to pull the air from the room. Though she couldn't see it, she felt its presence in every shadow, every echo of the hangar floor. Finally, he spoke again, voice low, tight with tension. Some secrets aren't meant for everyone. Not because they're trivial, but because the consequences of knowing them can be catastrophic. She swallowed hard, trembling. Sir, what could happen? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he paced slowly beside the jet, boots tapping against the floor with precise rhythm, each step carrying the weight of memory. He stopped at the base of the ladder and stared up at her, his eyes dark, haunted. Do you have any idea how many lives were risked, erased, or ended because of this? Her chest tightened. She wanted to look away, to retreat, but she couldn't. The commander's presence was magnetic, filled with authority, fear, and sorrow all at once. These missions, he continued, were meant to exist in the shadows. Their pilots were expendable. Officially, they didn't exist. Unofficially, they were legends and nightmares. One wrong word, one careless mention, and everything could unravel. Not just careers, but lives. Families, national security. She swallowed, her throat dry. I won't say anything. He glanced at her then, eyes narrowing slightly, searching for any flicker of doubt. "Words are dangerous," he said softly. "Even silence can be dangerous if you look the wrong way, ask the wrong question, or touch the wrong patch." His hand gestured vaguely toward the phantom. Her pulse raced. The warning was clear. This was bigger than any routine shift, bigger than the hangar, bigger than her life. She felt the weight pressing on her shoulders, invisible, suffocating. "Why hide it all?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. He exhaled, shoulders slumping. "Because some truths are too volatile. The men who flew these missions were heroes in their own right, but heroes whose deeds were impossible to acknowledge. The emblem, the dagger, those were marks of courage, but also of ruthlessness. Those who survived carried the burden, and those who didn't were erased." She shivered. The image of pilots disappearing into unknown skies, their lives erased from history, haunted her imagination. She pictured them strapping into jets, faces hard with determination, flying into danger with no record to prove their existence. "The patch," he said, drawing her attention back, "is a fragment of that past. It carries weight, not just symbolically, but historically. Every person who sees it is exposed, even in the smallest way, to the truth of what happened." Her fingers itched to reach out, to touch it again, but she resisted. She realized now why he had gone pale the first time he saw her holding it. It wasn't just fear. It was memory, trauma, guilt. He glanced around the hangar, shadows shifting. In the morning light, as if the room itself were listening. "You must understand," he said quietly, almost to himself, "that some stories don't belong to you. Some knowledge isn't yours to carry." And yet, he trailed off, staring at the emblem in his pocket as if weighing the temptation to reveal more. Her curiosity burned despite the warnings. "Sir, who made the patch? Who stitched it into the seat?" He stiffened, jaw tightening. "I can't say. Not now. Not ever." His eyes met hers again, hard, unyielding. "What matters is that you leave it alone. Forget it as best you can. Clean the plane, finish your shift, and walk away. Pretend it never existed." She nodded slowly, though her mind rebelled. Pretend it never existed? How could she? She had seen it, touched it, and understood, even if only partially, the stories it carried. It had already burrowed into her memory, impossible to erase. He studied her for a long moment, then sighed heavily. "You don't know what you've just stepped into," he murmured, voice almost breaking. "Some things are safer left unseen. Some truths are more dangerous than lies. And the weight of knowing them, well, it can crush even the strongest of men." Her throat tightened. "I understand, sir. I really do." He gave a slight nod, but didn't speak further. The silence stretched, thick and tense, until the distant hum of the hangar lights felt like a roar in her ears. She glanced at the other decommissioned aircraft, all lined up like silent sentinels. The old jets seemed to watch her now, knowing she had stumbled into their secrets. Finally, he turned and walked away, boots clicking against the hangar floor, leaving her alone in the cockpit with the echoes of his warnings. She exhaled, muscles relaxing slightly, but the tension didn't leave her body. She looked back at the seat, at the space where the patch had been hidden. The leather was cracked and worn, but it no longer held the same intrigue. It was now a marker of responsibility, a reminder that some histories weren't hers to explore. Her hands shook as she returned to cleaning, rubbing the panels, wiping the dials, performing her duties with mechanical precision. But her mind kept drifting back to the emblem, to the dagger, to the men whose lives had been erased. The hangar felt different now, alive with stories that had never been told, histories concealed behind steel and leather. Hours passed, and the routine of cleaning continued, but she moved with a new awareness. Every lever, every switch, Every crevice felt like it carried secrets. The air seemed heavier, as if each breath she took reminded her of the consequences. Of discovery. By the time she wheeled her cart toward the exit, the sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows across the floor. The commander's words echoed in her mind. Some knowledge isn't yours to carry. Some truths are too dangerous to know. She nodded to herself, silently promising to obey. And yet, deep in her chest, she knew she would never forget. The emblem, the dagger, the patch, they were burned into her memory. They would follow her forever, a silent burden of history and secrecy that no routine shift could erase. As she stepped outside the hangar into the bright sunlight, the sounds of the base resumed. Engines roaring in distant hangars, cadets shouting instructions, the occasional drone of a helicopter overhead. Life carried on as usual. To anyone else, it was an ordinary day, but she had glimpsed the unseen. She had touched a fragment of the past that the United States had tried to hide. And she knew, with the slow certainty of inevitability, that some part of her would never return to ignorance. The secrets she had uncovered in that cockpit were bigger than her, bigger than the hangar, bigger than the base, bigger than any rule or regulation. They belonged to men who had flown, vanished, and been erased. And now, some of that weight rested on her shoulders. The days that followed her discovery felt different from the first. She moved through the base as she always had, cart in hand, cloth dampened, cleaning the polished surfaces of cockpits and instrument panels. Yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every jet she approached, every crevice she scrubbed, seemed imbued with secrets she had glimpsed but could not touch. The emblem the commander had stashed in his pocket haunted her imagination. She pictured the eagle with the dagger stretching its wings beneath the leather seat, a silent witness to missions erased from history. Her curiosity battled with fear. Every instinct screamed that she must leave it alone, and yet she could not suppress the questions building inside her. What did it mean to carry such a secret? What did it cost the men who bore it? And what would it cost her if she ever spoke? Her thoughts returned often to the commander. He had been pale, almost haunted, when he saw the patch in her hands. He had not scolded her, had not yelled, yet the gravity in his silence was heavier than any reprimand. That alone told her the emblem was far more than a piece of fabric. It was history, and dangerous history at that. She remembered his words. Some knowledge isn't yours to carry. Some truths are too dangerous to know. And yet she carried it, a weight pressing against her chest like the very fuselage of the Phantom itself. That evening, she lingered in the hangar long after her shift ended. The place was quiet, the shadows stretching long beneath the high windows. She climbed into the Phantom's cockpit again, not to disturb the patch it remained hidden in the commander's pocket, but to feel closer to the fragment of history that had chosen her. Her fingers brushed over worn leather, over controls she had polished countless times before. She traced dials, toggles, and levers, imagining the pilots who had once gripped them, men who had flown into danger, knowing they would leave no record behind. Each touch felt like a connection across decades, a bridge to lives erased. Her mind raced with questions she dared not speak aloud. Who stitched the emblem into the cockpit? Was it the pilot, a member of the squadron, or someone who had survived and wanted to leave a mark? Why had it remained hidden for so long, and why now had she been the one to find it? A shiver ran down her spine. The answers were out there somewhere, buried in classified files, erased logs, and the memories of men who are long gone. She could never know them fully, and yet she felt their presence pressing on her, silent, heavy, demanding acknowledgement. The base was empty now, the sounds of activity muted to a distant hum. She crouched in the cockpit, inhaling the metallic scent of machinery and oil, and felt the enormity of what she had uncovered. It was not just a secret. It was a burden she could not share. Her thoughts drifted to the pilots themselves, the men whose lives had been erased. She pictured them strapping into jets, faces hard with determination, knowing that failure meant erasure. She imagined the missions they had flown, flights over forbidden airspace, strikes that would never appear in records, recoveries of intelligence that nobody would ever acknowledge. And she imagined the silence that followed, a world that pretended they had never existed. The weight of it pressed on her chest like a heavy stone. She realized that the commander had not merely warned her about consequences. He had tried to prepare her for the moral gravity of knowing. Knowledge, she understood, was dangerous. Not because it was forbidden, but because it demanded responsibility. Her mind returned to the patch, to the eagle with the dagger. She imagined it flying across oceans, over enemy territory, held tight, in the hands of pilots who would never be recognized. The symbolism was clear now. It represented courage, ruthlessness, sacrifice, and secrecy. But it also carried guilt, the guilt of lives erased, of missions unacknowledged, of history rewritten. By necessity, she shivered. The emblem was more than a relic. It was a testament to the impossible choices of men living in the gray spaces of war, where morality and duty collided. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her back to the present. It was a message from a colleague asking if she would finish her routine check in the next hangar. She hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to leave the phantom and the emblem alone. But she knew she had to continue her work, to move forward as though nothing had happened. She wiped her palms on her uniform, rose from the cockpit, and wheeled her cart toward the next aircraft. Yet her mind did not leave the phantom. Every step she took echoed with the weight of the past, a rhythm of responsibility that followed her across the hangar floor. Hours later, as she sat in her small office, she reviewed the base logs she was allowed to see. Nothing hinted at the squadron. Nothing mentioned secret missions or hidden hatches. She realized the emblem's story had vanished into the folds of classified history. The men who had flown those missions, the sacrifices they had made, were ghosts in every sense of the word. Her chest tightened. She knew now that seeing the patch had changed her. She could no longer approach the base as a simple cleaner, an invisible cog in the machinery of routine. She was aware now acutely of the shadows that lingered beneath. Every uniform, behind every decommissioned aircraft, in every whispered story. And she understood that knowledge carried consequences. She pictured the commander again, his pale face, the moment he realized she had found the emblem. His fear had not been for himself. It had been for her, for the weight she now carried. He had seen what happens when secrets are exposed, and he had understood the burden she would inherit. Her fingers itched to touch the patch again, but she resisted. It was not hers to hold. She had glimpsed it, and that was enough. She would remember. She would honor it silently. She would carry the weight without sharing it, because some truths were too dangerous to release into the world. Days passed, and life at the base returned to its normal rhythm. Jets roared overhead, cadets drilled on the airfield, and the hum of engines filled the air. Yet she walked among them with new eyes, aware that history was alive in every machine, every instrument panel, every patch stitched into leather that would never see recognition. The burden of the hidden emblem became a part of her, a quiet reminder that some stories must be carried in silence. She thought often of the pilots, of their courage, their ruthlessness, and their erasure from history. And she realized that, in some way, she had become a guardian of their secret. Each day she returned to her duties, cleaning, polishing, maintaining, yet always mindful of the weight she carried. The patch might be hidden, the men long gone, and the missions erased, but their legacy endured through the memory she kept. She knew she would never speak of it aloud. She could not. But she understood now the gravity of witnessing history, even in fragments. Some knowledge demanded stewardship. Some truths were heavy, and some burdens were not meant to be shared. And she would carry that burden, silently, faithfully, forever. The hangar was quiet that morning, the early sunlight spilling across the rows of aircraft in long, pale beams. She wheeled her cleaning cart down the familiar aisles, the scent of oil and metal filling her lungs. Every surface gleamed beneath. Her touch, but her mind was elsewhere, on the emblem, the dagger, the pilots, and the burden she now carried. She had returned to routine, performing her duties with precision, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every plane, every instrument panel, every patch stitched somewhere in the shadows seemed alive with hidden history. She could feel the weight of the past pressing down, tangible and unyielding. She paused at the Phantom. Its sleek body reflected the sunlight, the canopy glinting like a watchful eye. She crouched to inspect the cockpit, running her gloved hands over familiar controls. The seat where the patch had been hidden remained empty, unmarked by her cleaning. But the memory of it lingered, vivid and heavy in her mind. She thought of the commander, his pale face, the way he had handled the emblem with reverence and caution. His warnings had been clear. The patch was not hers to keep, not hers to reveal, and some truths were too dangerous to share. Yet, in entrusting her with silence, he had inadvertently made her a guardian of history. As she polished the control panel, she imagined the men who had flown with that emblem beneath their seats. Ghosts of the Cold War, their lives erased, their missions unacknowledged. She pictured them strapping into jets, the weight of secrecy pressing on their shoulders, yet carrying out their duties with unyielding resolve. They were hunters, warriors, men who lived in the gray spaces between duty and invisibility. And now, in a way she could never have anticipated, she had joined their silent legacy. Her thoughts drifted to the small details. The jagged stitching, the coarse thread, the dagger cutting across the eagle's wings. Every imperfection told a story. Every frayed edge hinted at urgency, danger, and a need for secrecy. She understood. Now that the patch was not just a symbol, it was a testament to choices made in shadows, sacrifices erased by necessity, and courage that never sought acknowledgement. The hangar remained silent, save for the distant hum of engines and the faint scrape of her cart across the concrete floor. Time seemed suspended, each moment stretching with quiet tension. She felt both honored and burdened, aware that she had glimpsed a fragment of history most would never know. A sudden sound pulled her from her reverie, the soft echo of footsteps, deliberate and careful. Her chest tightened. The commander. She glanced up, expecting the same stern gaze, but instead found him watching from the far side of the hangar, his expression unreadable. He approached slowly, boots clicking against the floor, eyes fixed on her. She straightened, hands on her cart, heart hammering. He stopped beside her, glancing at the Phantom with a long, thoughtful look. "You've done well," he said quietly, voice low, almost private. "Not everyone could bear the weight of what you've seen." She blinked, unsure how to respond. I just followed your instructions, sir. I didn't touch it again." He nodded, his gaze lingering on the cockpit. "Good. That's all anyone can ask. Silence is a duty sometimes greater than action. And history. Some of it belongs only to those who know and remember quietly." She felt a shiver run down her spine. The weight she carried was not only knowledge, but responsibility. She was part of a continuum now, an unspoken link between the past and the present, a keeper of secrets that might otherwise vanish forever. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly, curiosity and hesitation mingling in her voice. He looked at her then, eyes distant, reflecting years of memories, ghosts of missions lost to time. "Regret?" he echoed. "Sometimes. But regret is a luxury when lives, history, and duty are at stake. Those men, the squadron, they knew the cost of their choices. And so do we. She nodded slowly, understanding dawning. This was bigger than fear, bigger than obedience. It was stewardship. For the next hour, they worked in silence, side by side, attending to the phantom with meticulous care. Her hands moved automatically, polishing panels, checking instruments, cleaning every crevice, but her mind was alive with reflection. Every motion carried significance now, every duty intertwined with memory and history. She realized that the hangar itself had changed. It was no longer just a workplace. It was a shrine, a repository of stories erased from records, a testament to men who had flown, fought, and vanished without recognition. And she, a cleaner, had become a guardian of that history. The commander finally spoke, breaking the silence. "You will leave it be," he said, his tone softer now, almost like a whisper, meant for her alone. "You will continue your work, and you will honor it quietly. That's your role now." She understood immediately. It was not a punishment or a command. It was trust. A transfer of responsibility she had never sought, but could not refuse. She nodded, feeling a quiet resolve settle within her. "I understand, sir. I will." He gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Good," he said. "Remember, not all knowledge brings comfort. Some truths demand vigilance, silence, and respect. If you can carry that, you will honor them more than words ever could." Hours later, the hangar emptied. Sunlight faded. Shadows stretched longer across the concrete floor, and the jets stood silent like sentinels. She wheeled her cart toward the exit, every step measured, conscious of the weight she now bore. Outside, the world seemed unchanged. Cadets drilled, vehicles hummed, and the day continued as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. But she knew better. The past had followed her, embedded in memory, in conscience, in the quiet authority of the commander's words. She paused at the gate, glancing back at the hangar. The phantom gleamed under the fading sun, and for a moment she allowed herself to imagine the men who had flown with the emblem hidden beneath the seat. Ghosts of courage and sacrifice, erased from history but alive in her memory. And she realized that some things were not meant for the public, not meant for recognition, not meant to be celebrated. Some truths were meant to be guarded, remembered silently, and honored in quiet dignity. She turned and walked away, her shadow stretching long in the evening light, carrying the weight of history and the silent duty of a guardian. The emblem, the eagle, the dagger, they were no longer just symbols. They were her responsibility, her burden, and her tribute. The commander watched from the hangar entrance, expression unreadable, knowing the secret was safe for now. The legacy of the hidden squadron, the forgotten missions, the silent sacrifices, all remained protected, carried by the one who had seen but said nothing. And as she disappeared into the evening, the sun casting its golden glow over the base, the phantom stood as it always had, a sentinel, a vessel of secrets, and a reminder that some stories are never told aloud, but live on in the hearts of those who remember. Silence fell once more, the hangar empty, but the weight of history lingered, a quiet presence that would never fade. She had seen it, and in seeing it, she had become its keeper, a guardian of the past, a silent witness to a history that refused to vanish. And somewhere, in the shadows of memory, the squadron's emblem, the eagle with the dagger, soared forever, unseen but never forgotten.